Time had moved forward, but the land had not forgotten. Australia stood confidently in the modern world, its cities tall and bright, its economy strong, its image polished for the global stage. Yet beneath the glass buildings and busy streets, another story was rising, slow but unstoppable. For indigenous communities, survival had never been the end goal. Memory was. Every restriction, every loss, every silence had been carried forward, passed quietly from one generation to the next. Now, those memories were no longer confined to remote lands or private conversations. They were entering classrooms, courtrooms, media screens, and public squares. A new generation began to ask questions. Who owned this land before borders existed? Why were some stories celebrated while others were buried? And what did justice really mean in a country built on silence? These questions made people uncomfortable. And discomfort became the turning point. Universities began to challenge old narratives. Students read histories that had once been ignored. Teachers hesitated before difficult truths, knowing that once spoken, those truths could not be taken back. Museums changed their displays. Libraries opened new sections. Words like acknowledgement, truth, and responsibility entered everyday language. For some Australians, this was long overdue. For others, it felt like an attack on identity. But truth does not attack, it reveals. Indigenous leaders stepped forward, not only with stories of pain, but with visions for the future. They spoke about equality, recognition, and respect not as favors, but as rights. They reminded the nation that reconciliation did not mean forgetting the past, but learning from it. The relationship with the land itself began to change. People slowly started to understand that country was not just land to be owned or used. It was a living system. A teacher. A responsibility. Indigenous knowledge once dismissed proved vital for protecting ecosystems, managing fire, and restoring balance. Ancient wisdom met modern science, and for the first time, the country listened. Sacred sites were identified. Some were returned. Others were protected by law. These steps were small, but deeply symbolic. Each one was an admission that something had been wrong and that acknowledgement mattered. But healing was never simple. Hope grew in some places, while anger remained in others. Many felt the change came too late. Others feared it was going too far. Australia became a nation learning to sit with contradiction, progress and regret existing side by side. Art became a powerful voice. Films told stories once censored. Music carried grief and pride together. Paintings revealed truths words could not hold. And then there were the children. Children who learned that their country was not just a few centuries old, but tens of thousands of years ancient. Children who asked their parents questions their parents had never been taught to answer. Children who would grow up with a fuller, more honest understanding of where they stood. The land witnessed it all. Every conversation. Every protest. Every step toward understanding. Australia began to realize that identity was not fixed. It evolved. It demanded courage. And it required listening not once, but constantly. The journey was far from over. But for the first time, the direction was clear. The momentum did not stop there. Once the country began listening, it discovered that listening changed everything. Conversations that once felt impossible were now happening in homes, workplaces, and public spaces. People who had never questioned the foundations of the nation were beginning to understand that history was not a single straight line, but a web of experiences, some celebrated, others deliberately ignored. Indigenous voices were no longer speaking only about what had been lost. They were speaking about what could still be protected, rebuilt, and shared. Young leaders emerged with confidence shaped by both tradition and modern education. They spoke the language of law, policy, media, and activism, while remaining grounded in culture and community. Their message was clear: recognition was not about the past alone, but about shaping a fair future. Across the country, ceremonies returned to places where they had once been forbidden. Languages that had been pushed to the edge of extinction were spoken again, sometimes hesitantly, sometimes proudly. Elders taught children words that carried meanings deeper than translation words tied to land, responsibility, and belonging. Each spoken phrase felt like a quiet act of resistance and renewal. At the same time, resistance still existed. Not everyone was ready to accept change. Some feared that acknowledging the past would weaken the nation, rather than strengthen it. Debates filled newspapers and television screens. Online arguments grew loud and emotional. Australia was arguing with itself, trying to decide what kind of country it wanted to be. Yet even conflict signaled progress. Silence had been replaced by dialogue, and dialogue meant movement. Institutions slowly adapted. Schools revised curriculums. Government departments consulted indigenous advisors. Courts listened more carefully to land claims and cultural evidence. None of this happened quickly, and none of it happened without mistakes. But step by step, systems built without indigenous voices began, at last, to make space for them. On the land itself, change became visible. Traditional fire management practices reduced destructive bushfires. Native plants returned to areas once damaged by misuse. Animals reappeared where balance had been restored. These were not miracles, they were reminders that knowledge refined over thousands of years still mattered. For many Australians, this was a moment of awakening. They realized that reconciliation was not something that could be completed or checked off a list. It was a relationship, requiring care, honesty, and patience. It demanded that people remain uncomfortable at times, willing to learn, and willing to admit they did not have all the answers. Families sat together, sharing stories they had never discussed before. Some discovered ancestors they had never acknowledged. Others learned that the land they lived on carried histories far older than their homes. These discoveries did not erase pride, but they reshaped it. And through all of this, the land remained constant. It had seen arrival and removal, silence and resistance, forgetting and remembering. Now, it watched a nation trying imperfectly, slowly, but sincerely to grow. Australia was not finished becoming itself. Perhaps it never would be. But it had taken a crucial step. It had chosen to listen, even when listening was difficult. The story continued, not as a closed chapter, but as an ongoing responsibility passed forward to the next generation, written not only in books and speeches, but in choices made every day. Because the land never stopped remembering. And now, neither did the people.